Welcome back. In part two of Caryn McBride's chat with Professor Rosenberg, they talk about lessons learned from his experience, but they start with some of the most harrowing experiences.
Things don't happen out of nowhere. They don't fall from the sky. They're somehow connected in one way or another. When Fry left, he didn't leave. When he was kicked out of France, obviously I was again on my own.
Professor, it's been an extraordinary journey, and I'm sure there were many highlights along the way, but could you give us one?
At one time I was wounded. There was an ambush and I was wounded, and it was a highlight because when some of the friends said, "You're lucky, it's only a flesh wound." It's true. And the other moment is that I do remember, it always things is waking up in a hospital after having been operated, though it was a fake operation, I had faked it, and finding myself tied to the bed and a nurse sitting next to me. You understand why I was trying to run away, because I'd come from the camp. And I remember, and she says, "Well, who are you?" And so I told her. And when I asked her a favor, that's never forget, because here was somebody, basically a young woman who didn't know me, who really in many ways endangered her own existence, her own life. I asked her to take a message from the hospital where I was isolated and mail that letter in Lyon, where I had a contact address. She did, because obviously the response to that letter confirmed that she had done that. I often wished I had known who she was so I could have thanked her.
Is there anything that haunts you?
No. I have no nightmares. I have no Freudian kind of problems. No, I turned out to be pretty normal.
And Professor, we've talked about fate. You've just turned 95.
That's right.
I know we've talked.
That's a state secret.
Are there some secrets to longevity?
Well, I have an answer for that. Yes, I sell it for $500 a piece.
You plan to continue your teaching?
Oh, yes, as a matter of fact, my experiences probably led me to go into academia to teach, because I think teaching is more than just teaching. Teaching is not only describing, but also prescribing. You know, teaching is not just what exists, but what also should exist, really.
And what do we need to know to teach our children so that history does not repeat itself?
Well, I don't know whether we can teach our children history. It is not, history doesn't repeat itself. It is human beings who repeat themselves. So it's very difficult to teach children history as such, but to teach really that human beings have to be taught and have to change maybe. History doesn't exist. History is already a description of something. But it is really the human being himself, which is history. It makes history.
What concerns you now in our political climate, both here and abroad in Europe?
I think in very personal terms. I like the period I have lived. It had all kinds of cataclysms, but has also very long periods of prosperous times, good times. Not for everybody, but I think the world is in for a period, and I don't want to sound too optimistic, for a long period of upheavals. I think it's not going to be easily kind of solved. The whole question of it is, whether we like it or admit it or not, there is a cultural kind of struggle going on. between the Western world, if you want to call it that. I'm not saying one is better than the other, but that's a struggle. It's a cultural war is going on. It can be carried out in different forms, but that's the one that the next 25, 50 years will be characterized by that, I'm sure, in one form or another.
You're a witness to history, and it's a view from a window most of us cannot see. What life lessons has that shown you?
I wonder whether really the experience per se give you an answer to the human existence as such. In other words, I think the experience really have made it possible for me to draw certain conclusions. Conclusions first, for one thing, that violence, hatred, are some of the most terrible things that exist in this world. And therefore, that is something that each one of us should try to somehow curb in himself. That's a lesson, that's what I have learned out of it. The other lesson also is to be less judgmental. There is an interesting French saying, comprendre c'est tout pardonner. To understand everything is to forgive everything. That's an interesting statement too, you see. Very difficult to do. But that's what I'm still doing.
Coming up next, we'll take a look at some local headlines. Please stay with us.